Hello everyone, welcome back to the game programming online classes. As you recall, we talked about post-process, lights, blueprints, level streaming and matinee on last week. And in normal conditions, this week I was planning to talk about blueprints, particles and sequence. But I changed my mind and postponed the particles and sequence topics to the next session because the first thing is we need to improve ourselves in blueprints. And this week we will be more focused on blueprints. So last week we had some official video tutorials from Epic Games, and today we are continuing the video series. And after the video tutorials, I will show you more examples with blueprints. So here we go.
Okay, so we are back, and in the previous video we finished up inside the level blueprint, and we created the script so that when our player enters our little room here, the light that we've placed turns on. When we exit our room, the light turns off. We've done that inside the level blueprint here. So if I play in the editor and I enter our room, there's a little bit of a delay before our light comes on. And as we exit, again, we've added that delay node, so a little bit of a delay before it turns off. And our script is working, and we've done that inside the level blueprint. In this video, we're going to start working with class blueprints. And we're going to take this same setup that we've just done here with our little room and our little light. We're going to add a light on the outside here so that when the player approaches the light from the outside, it turns on and off, etc. We're going to take that same process that we've just done and do that with a class blueprint. Now you may be asking, well, why are we going to do a class blueprint if we've done this functionality inside the level blueprint already and it works? We can enter our room and it turns on our light. We can exit and it turns it off. Everything's functioning as we expected. Why are we going to do it in a class blueprint? Well, that's the reason why we kind of need to talk about class blueprints in this video and kind of illustrate why class blueprints are the perfect setup for this particular type of scenario. Say, for example, we had more than one of these rooms. So we have our little room here, but say this was a street, right? And we had multiple buildings. Say we had 10, 15, 20 of these buildings lined up and down our street. And we wanted to be able to enter each of those rooms and have our light turn on each of them and turn off when we exit each of our rooms. Well, since we've done this inside the level blueprint, we would need to create a trigger volume for each of our rooms. We'd need to add a point light for each of our rooms. We'd need to add this building structure that we've created for each of our rooms. And not only that, we would need to provide this same scripted functionality for each individual room, as we would need a reference to each point light that we are talking about. We would need a reference to each trigger volume that we are entering. So as you can see, this could get really repetitive if we are having multiple rooms, 10, 20, 30 versions of this room inside of our level blueprint. All that script is going to get really repetitive in copying, pasting all that information. And not only that, if we had another level and we wanted to take all these rooms and place them in a new level, we would have to recreate that entire setup inside that new level blueprint. So as you can see, it could get a bit tedious doing it inside the level blueprint. I mean, it's totally fine to do it that way, but working with class blueprints allows you to kind of cut down your work substantially by using a class blueprint for this type of thing here. So what we're going to do, first thing we're going to do actually is inside of our level blueprint, if you happen to close it, go ahead and go to the blueprints option from the toolbar. Let's go to open level blueprint, make sure you have it open. We're going to take our on actor begin overlap here, and on the executable pin here, let me mouse in just a little bit, we're going to right click on this executable pin. So go ahead and right click on it. It's going to give us a little context menu that gives us some pin actions. And there's two options here. It says break link to delay or jump to delay. We want to choose the break link to delay. And when it says delay, we are talking about this next node. So if I break the link to it, it will disconnect the two nodes. So we're going to do the same thing for the on actor in overlap here. So I'm going to right click on this pin and choose break link like so. We've essentially disabled the script now. If we compile and we play inside the editor here, because we've disconnected those two nodes there, we have no way of toggling on our light. So if I enter our room, nothing's going to happen because we have not made those connections. So we're going to disable this for now. You can turn this back on later if you'd like, but we're going to turn this same process into a blueprint class. So let's close the level blueprint for now. Let's close it out. And there's a couple different ways that you can create blueprint or class blueprints in Unreal Engine 4. And I'm going to show you probably the most common ways and then show you a little bit later the alternate ways that you can do it. So the first way, and probably the most common, is down through the content browser. What we're going to do, let's actually go to the root content folder here. Let's right-click on the content folder. We're going to create a brand new folder really quickly. So right-click on the content folder and choose New Folder. And then it's going to ask us for a name. Let's just call it Blueprints, like so. And make sure that that Blueprints folder is selected. And inside the content browser on the right, this is the asset tree. I guess I should mention this really quickly. This is the asset tree. This is the actual content browser here. So all of our assets are going to be displayed inside of this window over here. So if we went to the starter content, again, here's our architecture, assets, etc. We're going to store all of our class blueprints inside of this blueprints folder. Now that we have our blueprints folder set up, probably the most common way of creating blueprints is to right-click in the content browser, and it's going to give you a context menu. And there's several options, several things that we can create. But at the very top of the Create Basic Asset section of this context menu is the Blueprint class. So go ahead and select this Blueprint class option here. Just go ahead and select it. And it's going to give us a new dialog window called the Pick Parent Class dialog window. I kind of wanted to talk about this for just a second because you may be a little bit not sure of what this means here. So when we've decided to create a blueprint class, we are going to define the parent class for that blueprint. And by parent class, I mean we have different types of parent classes that we can choose here. When you choose a parent class, you're going to inherit some type of functionality from that parent class. So what I mean by that is, if we choose character here, the character as a parent has all kinds of stuff built into it that just comes with the character class when you create it. So things like movement speed and whether or not you can jump, falling information, all kinds of information that pertain to a character resides in the character parent class. So if we were creating a character blueprint, we would choose this and then inherit all kinds of information from the character that we can then use inside of our new blueprint that we created. Same thing for our player controller, game mode, etc. All of these types of classes have specific information related to them that can be inherited and used inside of your blueprint once you create it. So for our purposes, we're going to use an actor. And an actor is, as the tooltip here suggests, an object that can be placed or spawned in the world. And that's most of the time what you're going to be using when you're spawning things inside of your level or in our instance, making this toggleable light setup. We would want to do that with an actor. So let's go ahead and choose actor, actually. So I'm going to select actor. And it's going to create a brand new blueprint for us inside of our blueprints folder. And it's going to ask us to enter a new name. So let's go ahead and enter a name for it. And we're going to call this the light_BP. Again, there's that abbreviation for blueprints. So light_BP. I'm going to hit enter, and it's created a brand new light blueprint for us. Now that was one way that you can create blueprints by right-clicking in the content browser and choosing the blueprint class. You may have noticed if you look down under the Create Advanced Asset, under Blueprints, there's some additional options that you can take for the different types of blueprints that you can create. We're not going to cover these specifically in this video series because they're a bit outside of our scope for this video series, but you can create additional types of blueprints from the advanced option here, and that was done by right-clicking. And you can also click the Add New button, which gives you that same context menu. So there's that same context menu with those same options as before. Now, the other way that you can create blueprints is through the Details panel of the level editor. So if we have our light here, so say we selected our light, and over in the Details panel, see at the very top, there's a blue button for Blueprint Add Script. And the tooltip says converts this actor into a reusable blueprint class. So this is going to take this actor and add it to a blueprint that we can then manipulate. And we're going to actually do this a little bit later, this process of converting actors into a blueprint. We're going to take this whole setup that we've created. Actually, probably we're going to take the new light blueprint that we're going to add on the outside here as well. We're going to take all of those and convert them into a blueprint class a little bit later so that we can place multiple instances of that blueprint class in our level. So then we could take this whole modular piece, this whole blueprint class, and just drag and drop multiple instances of it in our level and have it just work. And not only in that, in multiple levels, we could do it as well. So our light blueprint is created. Those are the most common methods. There's one more method. It's a little bit of the obscure method, but you could use this as well. From the blueprints option, you can create a new blueprint, an empty blueprint class from here as well. You can also convert things to blueprint from this option as well. I would probably say 90% of the time you're going to be doing it from right-clicking and creating a blueprint class here, or if you prefer the method of adding things to your level and then selecting all those things and converting it to a blueprint. Those are probably the two most common workflows for creating blueprints in Unreal Engine 4. So our light blueprint is created. Let's go ahead and double click and open it up really quickly. So it is open, and you may have noticed now that the blueprint editor has taken on an entirely new form. We have this big giant window with a little ball here in the center. We have some more panels and tabs and all kinds of things here. Kind of want to go over this really quickly before we wrap up this video. We're about 10 minutes in. So what we are looking at is still the blueprint editor interface, but we are now looking at the class blueprint versus the level blueprint. So the same functionality for them pretty much exists. There are some additional things that you can do with the class blueprint that you can't do with the level blueprint. We have our My Blueprint panel, just as we did with the level blueprint. Let me actually see if I can open up both at the same time here so we can get a better view here. So I'm going to undock one. So here's our level blueprint. Can I do these side by side? Let's see. Working on one screen here, so I'm trying to get a view so that we can see both. Something like this. I'll just toggle between both of them. Not enough space on this monitor, so we'll just do it like this. So here's our level blueprint. We have our My Blueprint panel. We have the event graph where we can do our visual scripting. We have the details panel. If we look at the class blueprint now, we have the details panel over here on the right still. We have the My Blueprint panel, but our center section has changed a little bit. Not only that, we have an additional window above the My Blueprint section. So this section in the center here, we are currently set to the Viewport tab. And the Viewport tab of class blueprints allow you to see all the components that make up this blueprint. And when we say components, we are talking about the components window up here on the upper left. The components window consists of things that you add to this blueprint that define this blueprint. So in our case, we could add, if we go back to our level here, we could add, let me minimize all this stuff. There we go. So we could add all these pieces of walls as components. We could add our trigger box as a component. We can add our light as a component. All of these can be added as components to this blueprint. So what that allows us to do is take all of these pieces, this light, this trigger box, and all these pieces as one giant, well, I shouldn't say giant because it's really not that big, but one modular piece of an actor that we can then place as a single unit inside of our levels. So that's what the components panel is, and the viewport will allow you to see these objects inside, as the name suggests, the viewport here. So let me go ahead and pop this back up just a little bit. The next tab over from the viewport is the construction script, which we're going to work with this a little bit later in this video series, probably towards the end. So I won't go too in depth into it here, but what it allows you to do is set up some variables or things that you want to define inside the editor because anything that is changed about this blueprint, anytime you change anything about this blueprint, change any parameters or variables or anything that you do to this blueprint, move it inside the level viewport here, whatever is connected to this wire will get executed. Now this is only fired for non-gameplay, so before you play the game, when you're inside the level editor constructing your levels, etc., that's when this is fired. The event graph, which looks very similar to our level blueprint now, has some additional nodes here, and this is where we're doing our visual scripting, just as we did with the level blueprint a moment ago in the previous video. So that's what we do on the event graph, and we're actually going to pause here before we continue and start setting up this class blueprint. Let's recap really quickly here. So we are going to be working with class blueprints moving forward, and the class blueprint is a lot different than the, let me close this, the level blueprint, because the level blueprint is self-contained within each of your levels, whereas the class blueprint can be placed in multiple instances and can be placed across levels. So we're going to be working with class blueprints moving forward, and we're going to set ours up in the next video. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we work on our class blueprint. Okay, so we are back, and in the previous video we talked about class blueprints versus level blueprints and the advantages and disadvantages to using either of those based on your blueprint needs. We also talked about how to create class blueprints, so right-clicking in the content browser, choosing the blueprint class option, or from the add new or the blueprints option, as well as selecting several actors inside of your level and converting them to a blueprint, which we'll do later in this video series as well. We also talked about, if I right-click and go to blueprint class, the pick parent class. So deciding the parent class for our newly created blueprint class so that we can inherit some functionality from our parent when working with our new blueprint. And we created our light underscore BP blueprint based off of the actor class, which is something that can be placed inside of our level or spawned. And then we also, actually we did a lot in the previous video, we also walked through the class blueprint interface and the differences between the level blueprint. So with all of that out of the way, let's start focusing on this video. Let's start creating our class blueprint and the components that we will need that will comprise our class blueprint. So let's go ahead and double click and open our light BP blueprint here. Should be inside the blueprints folder. If it is not, you can select the content browser and then search for it in the, select the content folder and then search for it in the search bar here. Just light underscore BP is what we named it, and it should pop right up for us. Go ahead and double click and open it up. Now, if you did not close this blueprint at all from the last video in the transition to this one, and you are still on the viewport tab of this particular blueprint, don't worry. If you did close the blueprint and you are opening it up and you are seeing the same screen here, you are on the class defaults tab and you're wondering, how do I get back to the viewport tab of the blueprint editor? Don't worry, you can do that by clicking this open in a full blueprint editor. But I kind of wanted to show this really quickly because if you do not have any components or script associated with your blueprint, you're going to default to the class defaults tab. And the class defaults, we're not going to go too in-depth in this here, but the class defaults allow you to define, as the name suggests, default values for specific properties for this particular class, such as networking information, rendering, how it handles input, etc. All of that is defined inside of the class defaults. So to get back to the main blueprint editor interface here, we're going to click the open in full blueprint editor. And now it's going to transition us to the event graph of our blueprint. We can hop back to the viewport tab here, and this should look similar to how it looked when we first created this blueprint. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is add some components to this blueprint so that we have several objects that make up this blueprint essentially. And as we talked about in the previous video, that can be done from the components window. Now, again, there's a couple different ways that you can add components. You can click the add component button here, Or if you go down to the content browser, let me see if I can minimize this here so that we get both on screen. If you go down to the content browser, and you go into the starter content folder, and let's go to, let me clear my filter here. If we go to the, let's go to the props folder. Inside the props folder, we are going to use this lamp, SM_lamp wall fixture here. We can also left click and drag items into the components window here. You can see if you mouse over this section, it says drop asset here to add a component. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take our SM_lamp wall, left click and drag and drop that into the components window up here. And it's going to add a component to this blueprint. So now we have our SM_lamp_wall static mesh as a component of our newly created class blueprint. Now it's going to ask us for a name whenever we add a component. Let's just go ahead and give it a name. I guess SM_lamp wall is fine, but we're just going to call it lamp fixture, like so. And the next thing we're going to do, let's actually make this the root component. And by root, this is the thing that everything else is going to be attached to. Right now, we're using a default scene root, which is a dummy object that is created automatically by default. We can replace this with our static mesh. So I'm going to left click and drag our lamp fixture here and drop it on top of our default scene root. So go ahead and do that. And our lamp fixture now becomes the root of this blueprint, which is what we want. So let's continue now. Let's do a couple more things here. We're going to add some more components. So let's go to the components button here now, and let's click the add component button. So we have our fixture, and we click the add component. We want to add a light source to this now, so it illuminates light from this fixture. So we could use a point light, which we've done in the previous examples with our level blueprint, but we're going to add a different type of light for this. So let's go into the search component option, and let's search for spotlight. So when you search for spotlight, an option will come up. Go ahead and choose the spotlight. You can see it says it emits a directional cone-shaped light, which is perfect for our little fixture here. So go ahead and choose spotlight. And that now adds a spotlight component to our blueprint. So we have a static mesh component and we have a spotlight component. Now before we do anything else, I kind of want to compile and save this so that we saved our newly created blueprint. And I'm going to drag this blueprint off screen for a second. You can minimize it, or actually let's dock it. Let's dock it to the top up here. So I'm going to dock it to the top up here. And I'm going to go back to our level here for a second. Let's go down to that blueprints folder where we created our blueprint. And inside of it, you can see we now have our fixture that we added as a component. Our light source isn't necessarily emitting from this thumbnail, but it is there. But now we have our class blueprint here that we can add to our level. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's left click and drag our newly created class blueprint into our level like so. And I'm going to add mine to the side over here on the dark side of the wall so that we have a little bit of shadowing where we can have our light come on. So I'm going to place it over here, place it up somewhere along the wall, something like this. And we can use the translation tool. You can, again, hit W to get to that and position it somewhere on the wall. I'm going to do it something like this. It should be good. Something like that towards the back side of the wall in the shadow there. And our light is currently indicated by this cone shape. It is currently pointing out in this direction below our light source here. We actually want to have it coming up along the wall here. And this is where blueprints can get a little bit confusing depending on your background and where you're coming from. This particular workflow, I should say. You may be inclined to want to modify the position of this light directly inside of the level editor viewport here. But what we are going to do instead is modify that inside of our class blueprint. So I'm going to drag this down and kind of make a little bit of space here so that we can kind of see both. So there we go. There's our level. Let me back out just a little bit. There's our level, and here's our class blueprint here. And we are still on the viewport tab. Navigating the viewport tab of the class blueprint is identical to moving around in the viewport in the level editor. So we can hold down the right mouse button and kind of move around inside of it. We can hold W, A, S, and D to kind of fly around. We can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and zoom out, or excuse me, not zoom in and zoom out, but control the mouse movement inside the viewports. If you want to slow it down, just mouse wheel down. If you want to increase your movement speed, roll it up. So what we're going to do, let's take our spotlight here, make sure that it is selected. You can select it from the components window as well. Go ahead and hit E on your keyboard. That'll enter rotation mode. And what we're going to do is just rotate it 90 degrees along the y-axis here, so this green arc, so that it is pointing upward. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to left click and drag and rotate that up 90 degrees like so. And you can see it also updates inside of our level editor as well. So there's one more change that we need to do this. We need to actually bump it up so that it is not emitting from below our light fixture here. So I'm going to hit W to go back to translation mode, and I'm going to grab the red arrow here and move it up along the X. Oops, make sure I grab the red arrow and just move it up along the X here a little bit. Now I'm moving it at a much finer speed than you may be moving it. What I noticed just now is actually in between videos as I was playing around with this, I changed my grid snapping values. And that's something that you can do inside of the level editor as well. Up in the top up here, if we click this drop down here, I think it was set to 10 by default. Go ahead and bump that down to 1. That'll give you much finer control as you position this spotlight inside of our little light fixture here. So I'm going to fly around to our level, inside the level here, so we can kind of see what it looks like in our level and inside of our blueprint here. Just going to position it so that the light is kind of coming out like so. Something like this. Well, not like that, but like this. And I'm just going to move it, let's move it down somewhere around there. Doesn't have to be perfect, but so long as a light source is emitting out of the fixture here. If you want the exact values, you could set those inside the details panel as well for our spotlight. So we are currently sitting at 6.0 by 0 by 15.9. Just for the sake of it, I'm going to make that 16. So 6 for the X, 0 for the Y, and 16 for the Z, like so. And we're going to make a couple more modifications to our light as it's super bright right now. And we also want to adjust this cone radius here, which is indicated by this blue cone shape. So we're going to change both of those really quickly before we finish up. And first thing we're going to do is bump down this intensity a little bit. It's kind of high at 5,000. I'm going to drop this all the way down to 2,000, like so, to make that a little bit less bright. Then we're going to change the light color. So I'm going to click on this light color option, this bar right here. It's going to give me a light picker, so I can kind of just drag around. You can see it's updating my level as well as I drag around in here. Feel free to choose any color you'd like. For our purposes, I'm going to choose a kind of goldenish color, I guess, something like that, like so. I'm going to click OK to apply that color. And then the last thing I'm going to do is adjust the cone, the outer cone angle. Now there's an inner cone angle and an outer cone angle. We're only going to focus on the outer cone angle here. It's currently set to 44. I'm just going to drag this slider over to the right a little bit and stretch out that cone angle just a little bit. You can see that our light in the level now is kind of expanding. We want to get it somewhere around, I'd say somewhere around, let's see. Let's try 60. So I'm going to enter in 60 actually. Somewhere around there. Feel free to play with these values until you get something you are happy with. I think that's good enough for now because I want to get back to scripting stuff. So we've added our spotlight. We've added a static mesh. And I kind of wanted to point this out as well. What we are looking at inside of the level editor here is not just a spotlight or a not lamp fixture, but a static mesh. We are looking at a blueprint class. That's just what we have created and placed inside of our level. So this is a singular actor inside of our level. It is not multiple actors that are placed in our level. It is a singular actor with multiple components. And those components are our static mesh for our light fixture and our spotlight, and additional components, which we're going to add now before we wrap up this video here. So we have the visual aspect of our light here. We want to add some interactivity to this, similar to what we did with our level blueprint example. We're going to add a volume that when the player enters can turn on and off this light. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's add another component inside of our light blueprint here. So I'm going to click the Add Component button. And inside the search box, previously we added a box trigger. So if I search for box trigger, nothing comes up. But if I search for box, see there's an option for box collision. Now this box collision component is the same thing as using that box trigger before. So go ahead and choose the box collision. And it's going to add a box component for us inside of our viewport here, as well as inside of the level viewport. So if I back out, you can kind of see it. And as you can see, our box component is currently sitting inside of our wall, and it's currently up in the air. What we probably want to do is stretch it and kind of alter it so that it's flush with the floor and extends a little bit out away from the wall. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to do that, again, inside of the viewport of the blueprint class that we've created. We're going to take our translation widget and grab the x-axis and drag it over to the right just a little bit so that it comes off the wall and is somewhat flush with our light fixture. It doesn't have to be perfectly flush, but just so that it doesn't protrude onto the other side of our wall here and you can turn on and off the light from inside this room here, which is what we probably don't want. I think that's good. It looks close enough. But we also need to stretch it down to the floor as well. So to do that, we're going to go into our scale mode. So inside of our viewport here, we're going to hit R to enter scale mode. And going to take the Z-axis and let's see, just stretch it up a little bit. And that's going to stretch it. Going to go and press W now to go back to translation. And then I'm just going to slide it down a little bit so that it reaches the floor. And we can see inside of our level here, it's kind of penetrating the floor. It's just fine. It can be flush. Sticking to the floor is just fine. It shouldn't bother us too much. So now if we fly inside of our level here, here's our volume that we will need to enter. We could make this a little bit wider if we wanted, or make it stick out a little bit further. But I think this is good for now. I think we can continue to move forward. So we're about 15 minutes in. We're going to add one more component before we wrap this video up. In the next video, we'll do our functionality. So let's add that final component before we wrap this video. We want to add a little bit of user friendliness to this. So when the player enters this, they're not going to know to turn on this light. They're not going to know that they have to press a button, because that's what we want to do for this particular volume. Before, when we entered this one, it would automatically turn on and off. For this one, we want to turn it, set it up so that when the player enters this volume, they can then press a button to turn this light on and off. So that's what we're going to do for this particular volume. But we need to let the player know that they need to press a button. So a quick and easy way to do this is by adding a component. So go ahead and click Add Component. And let's search for text. So we're going to search for text. And it's going to give us a text renderer component. And this renders text in the world with the specified given font. So let's go ahead and choose a text renderer component. It's going to add another component for us. And as you can see, it's added some text inside of our level here, and it's also added it as a component inside of our viewport here. It's currently sticking inside of the wall, and it currently says text, so we can hop over to the details panel to change the properties of our text component that we just added. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Under the horizontal alignment, under the text section here for horizontal alignment, click this drop down. Let's change this to center. That will center up our text. And then let's actually change the text from text to something a little bit more descriptive. We're going to enter in, let's say, press F to toggle. So when the player presses F, that will be what we use to toggle on and off this light. So I'm going to hit enter. And our text is super big right now inside of our level. So let's actually scale that down a little bit. We can do that from the world size option here under the text section. It's currently set to 26. Let's set this to, I don't know, 18, maybe a little bit more. Let's set it to 12. Might be a little too small. I think that's good enough. We'll set it to 12. We do also need to adjust the position of this text. It's currently sitting up pretty high and inside the wall. So what we're going to do, let's go inside of our viewport here. Let's drag it down just a little bit, and let's slide it out away from the wall, something like so. So now if we look at it inside of our level, when the player comes in and enters this volume, they'll get this text that appears that says press F to toggle. And the last thing that we need to do before we wrap this video up is scroll all the way down to that visible option for rendering. We're actually going to uncheck this so that it is not showing, because we only want this to appear when the player enters our volume. And we're going to set that portion of script up through Blueprint script on our event graph actually in the next video. So make sure it's set to hidden, or excuse me, visible is unchecked so that it is hidden in game. So let's compile and save. And let's actually pause here before we continue. So far, we've added all the components that we need to our Blueprint class, and we've gone through the workflow of adding components and manipulating components inside of the Blueprint editor, and then placed our newly created Blueprint asset into our level to get a singular actor that has all of these components and everything we need for our Blueprint to work inside of our level here. So that's going to do it for this video. We're going to pause here, and we'll pick it back up in the next video where we start working inside the event graph and creating the Blueprint script for the functionality of this particular light here. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Okay guys, we are back, and in the previous video we were working inside of our light blueprint, and we were focused on adding the components or things that are going to make up our blueprint here. So we've added our static mesh, which we've renamed to lamp fixture, and then it's an appropriate name because it looks like a lamp fixture there. And we've also added a spotlight to give us a little bit more illumination with our little blueprint light here. We've added a box collision, which will be our trigger volume that when the player enters, we can fire off events and let us know when the player has entered or exited our box collision here. And we also added a text renderer component. Now our text is currently invisible. We've set this to hidden by default, as we're going to turn this on later when the player enters this volume, letting them know how they can press a button to turn on and off our light. And that process of actually being able to turn on and off the light, we're actually going to do that in the next video. In this video, what I wanted to do instead was recreate that same setup that we did for our level blueprint. So if you recall, back in our level, we could fly into this room and turn that light on, and then we could fly out and turn it back off. If we hop up to the level blueprint here and we open it up, that script that we set up, we're going to recreate this inside of our class blueprint now. And you may be wondering again, why are we going to do this? What's the purpose of redoing this if we've already done it in the level blueprint if it works? The real reason why we want to show you this is to kind of help display the modular aspect and benefits to using class blueprints. And I'll show you why here in a moment. So let's go ahead and close our level blueprint. Let's go back to our light blueprint, and let's hop over to our event graph. So we're on the event graph. And I'm going to pull this up just a little bit more, something like this, and zoom in. So we're now on our event graph, and we want to begin scripting that same functionality that we had in our level blueprint inside of our class blueprint. So how do we go about doing that? So we have our, in the background there, we have our blueprint selected. In the level blueprint, if you recall, when we selected something in the level and we opened our level blueprint, we could right-click in the graph, and the level blueprint would know that we have something selected in the level, and it would offer up suggestions for us to take on the actor that we have selected. However, with class blueprints, it's a little bit different. So we have our class blueprint selected. If we right-click in the graph, in the event graph of our class blueprint, so I'm going to right-click, notice we do not get those actions. We're getting something else. We're getting context-sensitive actions for text renderers. And the reason we're getting context-sensitive actions for text renderers is because we currently have our text renderer component selected over here. So class blueprints work similar to level blueprints. However, class blueprints are only aware of their individual components. They're not aware of the things that are placed in the level. They're only aware of their components. So if we select our box collision here, and then we right-click, now we're getting contextual actions for our box collision. And we could do the same thing for our spotlight, our lamp fixture, etc. But I just wanted to point that out because there's maybe a little bit of confusion there on why things are different versus the level blueprint versus the class blueprint. So I kind of wanted to illustrate that. So with that out of the way, we know the script that we want to create. We want to create this script of the delay. Well, actually, I want to kill those delays. We're not going to do the delays for the class blueprint version of this. We're just going to have the player overlap our box collision and toggle the visibility of our new spotlight. So that's the script that we're going to recreate inside of our light blueprint. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So again, what we're going to do, first of all, is need to get a reference to our spotlight. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. Let me maximize this a little bit more. We can take our spotlight component here, and we can left click and drag that directly into our graph. And what this is going to do when we release is add a new node called a get node. Now, we are currently using a getter here, just as we did with the level blueprint. I know I keep hopping back to it, but just as we did here, this point light is a getter to the point light in our level. Inside of our class blueprint here, this spotlight getter is a getter for the component spotlight. So we are actually getting a reference to this spotlight component. Now from this, we can modify its properties or, again, access that visibility setting to turn our light on and off, which is what we want. Now there's a couple other things I want to show really quickly before we continue. Down below the components, down in the My Blueprint panel, you may have noticed that we have a list of our components again. These components, depending on your workflow, depending on how you like to work, you could create your class blueprint, add all the components that you need to make up your blueprint, and then close the components window and no longer need to work with it. However, how would you access those components? How would you drag them into your graph and work with them? That's why they are listed here inside of the My Blueprint panel, because you can perform that same procedure of taking the spotlight and left clicking and dragging it into your graph. However, when taking it from the My Blueprint panel, when I release here, you'll notice we're going to get a little context menu. And it's going to give us two options now. We can either get reference to our spotlight or set reference to our spotlight. And if we choose set, we're going to get a little bit of a different node. The setter will allow us to change this spotlight to a different spotlight. So if we had another spotlight variable, we could plug that in here and say set our new spotlight to equal a different spotlight, for example. That's what the setter would do for us. We're not going to worry about the setter, so I'm actually going to delete that. But I just wanted to show that really quickly. Again, also, if you close your components window and you don't know how to get it back, you can go to the window option here from the toolbar and scroll down until you find components, and that will pop it back up for us. So I just wanted to show that really quickly, depending on your workflow. With earlier versions of Unreal Engine 4, the components window was its own separate tab, so it was not included when you were working on the event graph. So if you're on an earlier version of Unreal, you may not even see this components window. But as of, I think it's 4.6 or 4.7, this was added so that you could see it from any of the graphs that you're working on. So continuing, there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about regarding getters and setters. There's a quick shortcut that you can use. When dragging from the components window, we didn't have to actually do anything. We just left click and drag and drop it in. We can hold the Alt key while dragging in our spotlight, and that will perform a setter as well. So it's just a shortcut of quickly performing a setter or a getter. You could do the same thing from the components window down here. If you hold down Control and drag in our spotlight, that will perform a getter. If you hold down Alt and drag in, that will perform the setter. Did I say getter for this one? That's what I meant. So getters and setters. So we have a bunch of them in here. We're going to kill 4 of them here so that all we have left is our getter, because that's all we want to worry about for right now. So to toggle the visibility of our light, we kind of already know how to do this. We just need to drag off of our spotlight here and search for toggle visibility. And it's right there, ready for us. So let's go ahead and choose toggle visibility. And it's going to add the node for us. Now we need to add our overlap events for our box collision. However, before we do this, I kind of want to rename these so that they're a little bit more clearer. So it's not just box and text renderer. I think spotlight's fine. Even lamp fixture's fine too, but really it's these two. I'm just going to reselect our box trigger here before we add it, and I'm going to click on it again. It's going to give me the opportunity to rename it. So I'm going to rename this to trigger. it's a little bit clearer. And for our text renderer, I'm going to press F2 on it now with it selected. That will also let me rename it. We're going to call this the helpful text, because this is going to be the helpful text for the player so they know what to press when we get to that portion in a later video here. So back to our trigger here. Let's go ahead and select it now. If we right-click inside of our graph now, so I'm going to right-click inside of our graph, and now we can add events for our trigger. So let's go ahead and add our collision, and there's our overlap events. Now I kind of wanted to point this out. Notice it says on component begin overlap and not actor, because we are talking about components that we are overlapping. The actor is this light blueprint entirely. So we are talking about a component of the light blueprint actor. So let's go ahead and add a on component begin overlap, like so. And I'm going to move these down just a little bit to kind of get them out of the way there. And it's going to give us a bunch of other pins about the component that we could use to determine the types of collision that occurs with this trigger box. We're not going to worry about any of those. All we're going to do is take our executable wire here and plug that directly into our toggle visibility. Now, before we had a delay, we're not going to use that for this particular example. We just want to turn it on and turn it off when the player enters and exits our trigger volume. So I'm going to select the trigger again and going to scroll down just a little bit. Going to right click, add event for trigger under collision. And now we're adding the on component end overlap. So I'm going to select that. And just as we did before, I'm going to take the executable now, left click, and drag and plug that into our toggle visibility, like so. So our script is complete now. We can compile. Let's compile and save. And I'm going to kind of squish this back down again and zoom out so you can kind of see it like that. So it's in the background there. Now, let's test this. Let's play in the editor here. So I'm going to play. Let me make sure my sound's down. Let's play in the editor here. Now, when I run over to it, it's on by default. There's one thing that we forgot to do, actually. I made escape. Let's go back to our light blueprint here. Let's select our spotlight. And then over in the details panel, we forgot to do this. Let's actually scroll all the way down and let's find our rendering section. And there's that visible option. Let's uncheck visible. So we want it off by default. It's going to turn it off in our level, which you can see up there. So let's compile and save and then test this again. And save. And now when we play, our light is off. When we approach it, our light comes on. You can see it fires in the blueprint script there down below. When I leave, it turns it off, turns it on, and turns it off. So our script is complete. We recreated that same setup that we did for this section here. It's currently not working here because we disconnected it, but we recreated this inside of a class blueprint. Now, why did we do this? Let's take a look at why we did this here. I'm going to hit escape. Let's actually dock all of our blueprints up here. We can close the level blueprint for now because we don't need that. But let's go back to our level here. So here's our light. What we can do now, this is the really cool part of class blueprints. With our class blueprint here selected, we can hold Alt and grab this green arrow and just drag out a copy of this light blueprint. So I'm going to go to the other side, somewhere along the back here, move it along the back. Going to hit E to enter rotation mode and rotate it 90 degrees like so. Going to hit W to go back to translation and push it up against the wall, something like this. So it's along the back side of our wall here. Now the beauty is with the class blueprints, this blueprint that we just placed should automatically work. We shouldn't have to do anything else. We can go into our play session here. We can run over to this light and turn it on and it turns on. We can run over to this one and this one comes on as well. It's kind of sticking into the wall a little bit. I guess I could move it out so it's not inside the wall. I think the light bulb's inside the wall. So let me pop it out just a little bit more. Oh, it was not on the wall at all, actually. Way to go. Let me put it on the wall like so. So what we've done, though, is we've created a class blueprint that we can then place multiple instances without having to recreate that script. We only had to create that script once, and it just works for us. So I can now try it again. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So I can turn this one on. That one's still off. I can turn this one on. That one comes on. So that's the real power of class blueprints there. If we had done this inside of our level blueprint, what we would have had to have done is create copies of our trigger, create copies of our point light, inside of our level blueprint here, we would have to recreate this script for each individual point light, for each individual trigger. So it just cuts down our workload by quite a bit, actually, when we're working with class blueprints. So that's actually going to cause us to pause here. We're about 13 minutes in. We're going to pause here. And again, we've worked inside of our class blueprint and set it up so that we can have multiple instances of it inside of our level. Not only that, we could take our class blueprint here and place this in an entirely new level, and it will just work automatically without having to do extra script. That's going to do it for this video. In the next video, we will begin modifying this blueprint so that we can set it up so that the player can enter the volume and press a button to turn on our light, or turn our light on and off. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome back. So in the previous video, we were working inside of our light blueprint, our blueprint class, and we set it up so that when the player enters our box collision here, our trigger, the light comes on, and when they exit, it goes off. And we also created another instance of it really quickly, actually, just by dragging out a copy inside of our level here. So we have two instances that we were able to create really quickly of our blueprint. And both of them just worked. We didn't have to provide any functionality, any extra functionality to get that second copy to work. So if I play in the editor, actually, this light works as soon as we enter our volume, it comes on. And we also can enter this one as well, and that one comes on, and when we leave, it goes off, just as we expected. Did want to mention, if you actually accidentally fall off the level and are just falling in space like this and you're completely new to Unreal Engine, go ahead and hit escape. That will get you out of the play session there, and you could just play again. I guess I should have mentioned that in the previous video, because it is kind of a bit of a tight space back here. Plus it's fun to watch them fall off. Get out of here. So let's go ahead and continue, actually. In this video, what we're going to do is allow the player to enter our trigger volume here, and instead of the light coming on automatically, we're going to allow the player to press a button to turn that light on or off, but only when they are inside of our trigger volume. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's go ahead and open up our light blueprint. So far, we have been working inside of the content browser to go ahead and open up our light blueprint just by double-clicking on it. But there's other ways to get to this particular blueprint as well. We can select it inside of our level here, and then over in the details panel, there's a big blue button that says Edit Blueprint. We can actually open up this blueprint from this button as well. So if I click this, we're going to get a drop-down menu with a bunch of different options. There's some stuff for instance modifications and creating child class blueprints, etc. We're not going to worry about any of these for now. They're a little bit outside the scope of the introduction to blueprints. All we're really worried about is opening the blueprint editor or adding or editing script. Now, in both cases, for our particular instance, because we have a node network set up already, both of these will take us to the event graph. If you had just created a blueprint and placed it in your level and you don't have any components or anything in it, opening the blueprint editor would probably open it to the viewport so that you can add components to it. And then this option here, as the tooltip says, will open the blueprint editor for this asset directly at the event graph. So either one of these will be fine to open it. You can also actually go to the Blueprints button here at the main toolbar and go down to the Open Blueprint class, and we can scroll through the list of blueprints that we have in our project here. Some of these were, again, created with the starter content, but there's our light blueprint right there. You could select it from here as well, and that will also open up the blueprint in the blueprint editor. Now, what we're going to do is allow the player to provide input and toggle on our light or toggle it off. Now, how do we get started with that? We know that we only want the player to be able to press a button when they're inside of our trigger volume. So we're going to use our onComponentBegin overlap and our onComponentEnd overlap to let us know when the player is inside of our trigger volume there. So what we're going to do is, first of all, let's disconnect our current setup that we have here, because we don't want to have our setup function this way. So let's go over to our toggle visibility here. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and while holding down the Alt key, let's hover over the executable here and see how both of our wires are highlighted here. If I left click, that's going to disconnect all the wires that are connected to this node. So it's just a handy shortcut. So far we have been right clicking and choosing the break link option, which does the same thing. but another just shortcut inside of Blueprint. You can easily disconnect wires just by holding down Alt and left clicking as well. So with our script disconnected at the moment, let's left click and drag a selection box around our spotlight and our toggle visibility. Got a mouse wheel down to zoom out a little bit. Right click and drag and move these nodes down here for just a second. We'll get back to these in a moment. All we're really going to be focused on right now is our onComponent begin overlap and our onComponent end overlap. So we know that when the player enters our volume, we want to allow the player to provide some sort of input to turn our light on and off. So how do we get to that point? We don't have any references or anything that we can gather, so we're going to have to add a new node. We're going to drag off the executable pin here for our onComponent begin overlap. So when the player enters our volume, let's drag off our executable and let's place a new node. So I'll release. And we know that we want to provide the player a way to enter some kind of input. So let's just search for input, see what comes up. And as we search for input, due to context sensitivity, everything with input comes up. There's stuff for touch input, which is not quite what we want. So I'm going to collapse this and kind of look through our list a little bit more. And there's a couple options here, a couple functions. There's an enable input, and there's also a disable input. So I mouse over this enable input here. It says pushes this actor onto the stack of input being handled by a player controller. In essence, what this means is that the player controller, the player driving the character or battleship or whatever is being controlled in the game, is going to be used to enable input. So go ahead and select the enable input here, and that's going to add a new node for us. Like so. So we have a new node, and this node is targeting an actor, and it's looking for a target, and it's currently set to self. And I kind of wanted to mention this really quickly, especially if you're not coming from a programming background. This may be a little bit confusing. What is self? What are we talking about? Well, self literally means this blueprint. We are talking about ourself. So when we say onComponent begin overlap and enable input on an actor, and we are saying self, we are saying allow input on this particular blueprint in our level. And below that, it's saying player controller. If I hover over it, it says the player controller whose input events we want to receive. We're actually going to work in the opposite direction for this. So we have an input that we need to provide it to. We don't want to use any of our pins over here. We're going to left click and drag off of this in the opposite direction. And we're just going to search for player controller. So let's search for player controller. Oops, if I could spell. I guess I only need to enter as player. And this gives us enough options to work with here. We don't want to necessarily create a player, but we do want to get a player controller, and it returns the player controller at the specified player index. So let's go ahead and select this get player controller. And that's going to get a reference to the player controller at the specified index. Now this is where things can get a little bit tricky, a little bit complicated, especially if we were doing this for a multiplayer situation. For a single player situation, the player index is referred to, or excuse me, not referred to, I should say, uses a zero-based sum. So when we say player index 0, we're talking about player 1. And since we only have one player, we're talking about the player playing the game. So this is going to return whoever is playing that game as the controller to allow input for. So our player that is playing the game will then be able to provide input directly to ourself, this blueprint. So with that set up, we have our enable input. Let's do the disable input now. So let's drag off this, the onComponent end overlap. And again, if we search for input and we hide all of our touch input, there's our enable. Let's select our disable so it removes this actor from the stack of input being handled by a player controller. Let's go ahead and select the disable input. And again, it is asking for a player controller reference. It's targeting ourself. It's all great. Let's just use our current player controller node here. Let's drag off the return value and plug that into our player controller here. So it's getting the reference in both instances. I mean, we could just as easily Control C on it and Control V to paste a copy of it and connected it like so. because they're both referencing player index 0. It's just a matter of how you'd like to work, but this works just as fine doing it like so. So our script is set up so that we can enable input when the player enters our trigger volume here. Now we need to hop down to our toggle visibility and allow the player to actually press a button to turn on and off our light. So how do we do that? Let's actually just right-click inside of our graph here. And if you recall in our text, our helpful text over here that we created, a component, we said that we were going to press F to toggle. So inside of our graph here, let's right-click and let's press the F key and see what we get. And right there, the first one that comes up is keyboard events, and events for when the F key is pressed or released. So let's go ahead and select the F key event here. And you're going to see we get a pressed pin and we get a released pin. All we need to worry about is the pressed pin. So let's take our pressed and plug that into the toggle visibility like so. So our script is set up. We can test this now. Let's compile and save. And I'm going to try and minimize this so I get all of it on screen if I can. Something like, well, I guess I'm going to move this over. Just drag a selection box around this and move it up here. You don't necessarily have to do this. I'm just trying to get clever with my screen space so that the script is on screen as well. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and test this now. Our script is set up. We compiled. We saved. Let's play. And right now, when I go over to our lamp blueprint here, our script is triggering. You can see it in the bottom there, triggering on and off when we enter it. If we press F, our light comes on. If I press F again, it comes off, and the script is updating. If I press F and turn it on, and I leave the trigger volume, if I try to press F again, notice that our script is not firing because we are not inside of the trigger volume. But as soon as we enter, we can press F and turn it off. Now, again, because we're using class blueprints, if we go over to this particular instance, we enter our trigger volume. Now, it's not showing up inside of our script down here that we are entering and exiting it. And I'll show you why in a moment. But we can press F, and it turns on, and it turns off. The reason why this one is not showing up excuse me, below in the graph down there is because we are currently looking at this instance. The instance over here, we are currently viewing that instance inside of our graph here. But if I hold Shift and F1, it's going to give me mouse control to get back to my mouse control here. And it's going to have to slide this one over just a little bit more. We are currently debugging this particular instance, the light_BP. If I click this drop down, you can see that we have a second reference. That is our second reference here. It's light_BP2. So if I select this one, now we are getting the visual display of what's happening with this script in the level. Just a way of debugging your blueprints. Because we have multiple instances, we need to specify which blueprint we are looking at inside of our graph here. So I just wanted to show you that really quickly, but our system is working. There's one other thing that we need to do. If you recall, our helpful text isn't currently being displayed. We need to set it up so that when we enter our volume here, our text comes up and lets us know which key we need to press, because right now the player wouldn't know otherwise. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit escape here and going to resize this a little bit. And in our components, there is our helpful text. What we're going to do is just drag that in from the components panel there. Left click and drag that into the graph. It's going to perform a getter for us. So we are getting that helpful text. And let me grab this stuff again really quickly and just move it down here like so. So off of our helpful text, just as we've been doing with our spotlight, all we want to do is toggle that visibility of our text. So we're going to drag off of helpful text here, just left click and release. And let's search for toggle visibility or toggle viz. And it's going to give us that option. So go ahead and select the toggle visibility. And let's move it up just a little bit so that when we enter our trigger, we're going to enable input, and we're also going to turn our helpful text on. So let's make a connection between this executable and this executable here. Then we need to do the opposite for when the player leaves the trigger volume. So when I leave the trigger volume, disable input, and again, call that toggle visibility. So let's left click and drag and plug it in here like so. And I keep moving you around screen space. So let me move you down here maybe. Okay, we are set. I'm just moving things around just for the sake of vanity so the wires aren't crossing all over the place. I know this one's crossing, but I think that's good. So we are set now. When we enter, enable input, show the helpful text. We can press F and turn on our light. When we exit, disable input and remove our helpful text. So let's compile and save. And let's test this if I can make it all fit. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Let me actually move these nodes over just a little bit too. There we go. So let's test this. I'm going to play in the editor here. And we are currently looking at BP2 in our debug here. So let's switch that to BP, the light underscore BP. So there's our text. Press F to toggle. I'm going to hit F. It's on. As soon as I leave, the text goes away. I can no longer press F to turn it off. So it is working exactly as we expected. And just for the sake of a full view, I'm going to dock it up here for a second. So when we approach it, press F to toggle. Okay, I'll press F and it comes on. Same with the one back here. Press F to toggle, and it works. So at this point, if you have gotten this far and it's all working exactly as my setup here, congratulations. If it is not, do not worry. Take a look at the full setup here. If you need to, actually pause for a second and make sure that your connections look similar to mine. Again, we are overlapping the trigger, enabling input, toggling the visibility of our helpful text. When we leave the trigger, we are disabling input and removing our helpful text. Only when the player is inside of the trigger volume are we allowing the ability to press F and toggle visibility of our spotlight. So the last thing that I want to do in this video before we wrap this video up and move on, I wanted to show you a handy thing you can do inside of Blueprints just for the sake of cleanliness, and it will make your life a lot easier down the road once you start working with more complex blueprints. What we're going to do is left click inside of our graph here, and we're going to drag a selection box around all of these nodes here. Not necessarily the F key, but our overlap event nodes here. And once you release and have them all selected, we're going to press C on our keyboard, C as in cat. And that's going to give us a comment box. So we can add helpful reminders of what this does for us, what this script does for us, so that we can see visually what this script does for us and not have to kind of go through our node network and say, what is this node? What does this do again? So let's add a comment. Let's add a helpful comment. We're going to say, when overlapping trigger, enable input and show helpful text. When leaving trigger, disable input and remove helpful. My comment's super long, I know. Usually you'd probably want to have smaller comments, but I'm making mine super long here just so that it's super helpful. Disable input and remove helpful text. So you can also resize your comment boxes here. You can see mine's getting shifted down now, the text, which is a little bit better. But the cool thing with comments is if you go to the details panel here, you can change the comment color. You can actually enter the comment text there as well. But you can change the comment color by clicking this color picker here. You can change it to any color you want. So I'm going to say, let's just say blue, just because blue is pretty. And we can hit OK. And from a glance, we can see our text a little bit better now. There's some other options in here for adding a comment bubble. Whether or not to use comment bubbles or not, these will appear as little bubbles above the comment with it checked when you zoom way out, like so. And then there's also movement mode, whether or not you can move the nodes within the comment box. So if I click the header up here, you see I get this little crosshairs symbol. If I left click, I can now move that entire network around. So it just makes our life a little bit easier as we are working inside of our graph. So I'm going to do the same thing for our F press event here. I'm just going to left click and drag a selection box around it, hit C to create a comment. We're going to make this comment a lot shorter. We're just going to say, press F to toggle light. And over in the details, let's change this to a lovely shade of reddish pink, like that, orange. There you go. Something like that. So there we go. We have created our script to allow the player to enter our trigger volume and press a button to turn on or off our light, but only when they are inside of our trigger volume. And we also display our helpful text as well, only when the player is inside the trigger volume. That is actually going to do it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be working inside of the construction script here, if I can pronounce it. The construction script, that's where we're going to be creating some additional script to give us that extra layer of flexibility with our blueprints. So right now, what happens, anytime we make changes to our blueprint, so inside of our blueprint here, anytime we make changes to our blueprint, it's going to affect all instances of that blueprint in our level, which we may not want. We may want only the ability to press a button on this one back here, or we don't want the helpful text to show here, or we want this color of the light to be, or this light to be a different color, etc. We may want to have some flexibility in our blueprint. So we're going to do that inside of the construction script in the next video. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Greetings guys, we are back, and in the previous video we were working inside of our light blueprint, and we set it up so that when the player approaches our light, quick refresher here, approaches our light, our help text is appearing and it tells us to press F to toggle, so we can press F and turn on our light. We can press it again and turn it off. If we turn it on and we exit our trigger volume, our help text goes away and we can no longer press F to turn on or off our light because we are not close enough to it, but we could turn it off as we get close to it again. And because we're using class blueprints, we were able to create a second instance of our little light setup here. And this one just works automatically. Everything that we've done carries over to this instance as well. So we can turn this one on, or we can turn this one on or off, and they work individually. So that's what we did in the previous video, but we're going to take it a little bit further, one step at a time, continuing our baby step journey into blueprints in this video with the construction script. And the construction script is going to allow us to add variants to each individual instance of our blueprint. And what do I mean by that? So say we have our two lights here. Suppose we wanted this light to be green and we wanted this light to be red, or suppose we didn't want the text to appear when we enter the trigger volume, etc. How would we go about doing that? Because anytime we make a change to our blueprint so far, it has been carried over to this instance of the blueprint of the other instance of this blueprint as well. So how would we go about doing that? Well, we're going to do that inside the construction script. So let's go ahead and open up our light blueprint. So I'm going to double click and open it up. It's going to take us to the event graph, which is where we provided all the script for the behavior of our light thus far. But we're going to leave the event graph and we're going to hop over to the construction script. So go ahead and click this tab in the center here. And we get an entirely new graph with just one singular node on it. And this is the construction script. So everything that we've been doing so far on the event graph, all that script kind of pertains to what happens in game. So when you're in game, the event graph is updating and checking things and making sure that your script is functioning as you set it up. The construction script, as the name kind of suggests, is being used when you are constructing this blueprint, when you are working with this blueprint, when you are level designing and building out your levels. The construction script is used to update the properties of your blueprint. So anytime you make any changes to this blueprint, if you move it inside the level, if you change some of the properties of the light, for example, this construction script is going to fire to make sure that it has the most updated information about this blueprint. So how can we use this to our advantage? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take our spotlight and kind of what we've been doing on the event graph here by getting a reference to our spotlight. We're going to do that on the construction script. And a little bit of a warning, this is a little bit more of an advanced, well, I shouldn't say advanced, intermediate blueprint application here, but we've kind of worked our way up to this point, so I feel comfortable that you guys should be able to follow along and should have a lot of fun and make our light a little bit more customizable. So we're going to continue. We're going to march forward. Let's take our spotlight in our components here. We're going to left click and drag that into our graph. Just left click and drag it into our graph. That's going to give us a getter. So now that we have our spotlight, we know that we want to be able to change the color of our spotlight. So how can we do that? Well, if we drag off of our pin here and we release, we can search for color. And that's what we want to change, so let's search for color. And when we search for color, you see we have the option to get light color, so we can get the current color that's being used, or we can set the light color. So let's go ahead and choose Set Light Color. It's going to give us a new node connected to our spotlight. And below our target here, we have the option of adding a new light color. So whatever we define as this new light color will be the color that is used for our spotlight. You can see there's a little box here to the right of that. We could actually click right here and define what that color will be right here inside of the color picker. But we're going to do something a little bit more intermediate just so that we have some more flexibility with how our little light blueprint works here. What we're going to do is on this pin here, we're going to right click on it. Let's go ahead and right click on it. It's going to give us a little context menu. There's two options here. We're not going to worry about this bottom one here. We're going to worry about this one right here at the top. It says Promote to Variable. So go ahead and choose this option. And when we do, it's going to give us a brand new node that is automatically connected to it. And this node will hold the value of our new light color. So I'm going to move it down here just a little bit under our spotlight like so, just so it's a little bit cleaner. And with this node selected, I'm going to go over to the Details panel on the upper right up here. And we're going to rename this first of all, because new var isn't very helpful to us. We're just going to call this Light Color, like so. And if you look down in the default value section, we currently can't set what this value is. We need to compile before we do that. So it says, please compile this blueprint. So let's go ahead and do that since it's trying to tell us to do so. So I'm going to go to the toolbar, click Compile, and it's going to say that we are ready. We are good to go, as the tooltip suggests. That must be the most helpful tooltip ever. We are good to go. Let's go over to the default value now. We can now set what our default value is going to be. So I'm going to click this bar here, and we can choose a color. In fact, you know what we could do? Let's actually close this. Let's go to our spotlight in the components window over here, and let's go to our light color that we had previously set. So in the details panel here, let's go ahead and click this. We're going to take our old color here that we had previously assigned, or new, because we're not going to change it here. We can left click. Let's drag that up to our color bar here, like so, just so that we have a reference to what that color was. We don't need to hit OK or cancel here. We can just close this now. Now we're going to select our light color node here and assign that value as our default value. So let's click our color picker here. There's our color. Let's go ahead and select that. And that's going to be our default value again. So let's go ahead and hit OK, like so. And the last thing that we need to do is take our construction script here and connect it to set light color, like so. And let's move that down just a little bit so it is nice and clean. So now we've used the construction script to set our light color. But there's one more thing we need to do before we are done and ready to test this. Back in the details panel for our light color here, let's go back to the details panel. There's an option called editable. And if you mouse over it, it says whether this variable is publicly editable on instances of this blueprint. This is what we want. We want to check this. So go ahead and check this. And when we do so, over on the far right, over in our My Blueprint panel, here is our light color variable. I guess I should have pointed this out earlier. That got added when we created this. Anytime we create a variable, it'll get added here. In fact, we could have created this light color right here from the variables section by clicking Add, and then over in the details panel, changing it to a linear color like we did, linear color like so, and then we could have dragged this in and then plugged it in. But it was much easier to just right click on this and say promote to variable. So that's why we did it that way. But I guess I should have mentioned that it did get added to the My Blueprint panel when we created that variable. But back to our light color here. On the far right, we have this eye icon. And this eye icon lets us know that this variable is now publicly editable. And we'll show you what this means in a moment. But if we mouse over the eye icon, it says variable is public but missing tooltip. We can actually add a tooltip to this as well. So if we go back to our details panel, under editable, there's an option for tooltip. It says extra information about this variable shown when the cursor is over it. So let's add a tooltip. And this is going to be to change the color of the light. So change color of the light. and we hit enter. And when we do so, our little eye icon over here is now happy. It's green. So let's go ahead and compile and save. And when we compiled, notice again our construction script fired and updated. Let's save this. And let's go back to our level here. So I'm going to go back to our level. And when we play, or actually before we play, let's make some changes to our light. So with our light selected in the level now, if you look in the details panel, we have a new property that we can adjust. So here's our default light color. For this particular light, we can change this light color. We could say, let's make this one red, like so. So we hit OK. Now when we select this instance over here, it has its default value, but we can change this one to a different color. So we can click the color picker here. We'll make this one green, like so. And if we play now, when we go over to our light and we press F, this one comes on as red. When we go to this one and we press F, this one comes on as green. So now we have some flexibility with how our Blueprint class is functioning inside of our level. So that is all fine and dandy. We've pretty much accomplished what we've set after to do, but there's one more thing that I kind of wanted to show you really quickly before we wrap this video up. Let's hop back to our level blueprint, or excuse me, not level blueprint, but our light blueprint. I'm going to undock this for just a second here. Excuse me. So if we select our light in the level and we wanted to change the light color, it's really not very helpful for us as level designers to kind of change and tune and tweak to get the light value that we want, because we're not seeing it reflected in real time. We have to actually play and run over to our light and turn it on and see to see the effects of our change. So we're going to make one more change to this to make it easier for us as level designers to tune and tweak our lights inside of our level here. So what we're going to do, back on our construction script here, let me move this over just a little bit. We're going to take our spotlight here, and we're going to drag off of it. And before we have been using the toggle visibility to toggle our light on and off. For debug purposes and for us to adjust this as level designers, I'm going to hold home and delete all that. Let's go for set visibility. So we want to be able to set the visibility here. So we're going to choose set visibility, and that's going to give us a new node. And there's a couple pins on here, propagate to children, etc. We're not going to worry about propagate to children, but the new visibility is whether or not this light should be on or off. And that's that same property inside of our details panel here. If I scroll down under the rendering section, that's that property right here that we are going to be defining. So how can we use this to help us in our level creation process? Let's go ahead and drag our set visibility up and connect it to our light color, like so. So let me maximize this so that you can see what we're doing here. So make sure that our light color is connected to our set visibility. And just as we did before with our light color, where we right-clicked and created a property, we're going to do the same thing for our new visibility. So let's right-click again on the new visibility pin and promote that to a variable. And our node got kind of hidden up there, so I'm just going to move it down just a little bit. And we're going to rename this, again, just as we did before, inside the details panel. We're going to call this, we'll just call it the visibility setting. So visibility setting. And we're going to make this publicly editable so that we can define whether our light is on or off inside of the level editor. So I'm going to check this box here. And let's add a tooltip just for the sake of being a good designer here. So we're going to say turn on or off the light. So with all of that, let's compile and save. And then let's close this blueprint. And if we go back to our light in the level here, inside the details panel, we have another new property that we could play with. And if we mouse over, I guess I should have showed this earlier too. We mouse over, it says turn on or off the light. It says change the color of the light. So by default, we could turn this light on inside of our level. And that'll allow us to now manipulate the color right here inside the level. And we can kind of see what the light is going to be. We can hit OK and change the color. We can go over to this one here and select it and turn this one on and say that this one is now bluish color, like so. And because we're leaving, let's leave this one back here checked. So we're going to leave visibility set to on. So this light will be on by default now. And whenever we enter this trigger, we will press F and turn it off. And then when we're in the trigger, we can press on or press F to turn it on and off. But by default, it will now be on. For this one, we're going to uncheck the visibility setting and it's going to be off by default. So it's going to be just like it was before. But this one is now on by default. So let's go ahead and play now and see what happens. If we run over, our light is off, but our light on the back side there is currently on and it has a lovely shade of blue. So we can go to this one, we can press F to turn this one on and it's green. We can go to this one and press F to turn it off. So there we go. We've added the ability to kind of implement some tools for us as level designers to kind of modify our blueprints directly inside of the details panel right here inside of the level editor. Rather than opening up our blueprint class and making changes inside of our blueprint, we've exposed variables for us to modify it directly inside of the level editor here. So it's just made our life a little bit easier. So with that, we are actually going to pause here. This is going to do it for this video. We've been working inside the construction script inside of our class blueprint here. And we've made our life so much easier for modifying our blueprints inside of the construction script. That's going to do it for this video. We will see you in the next video where we begin talking about the different workflows for creating class blueprints. So far, we have been creating a blueprint inside the content browser and then inside of the blueprint editor, adding components and making modifications inside of our class blueprint. In the next video, we're going to talk about the different workflow where we can work inside of the level editor and add the components that we need inside of the level editor and then turn that into a blueprint as well. Just a different workflow that we're going to use to wrap up this series. So that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching and we will see you in the next video.
So at this point we are able to use level blueprints and also we can create blueprint classes. I will demonstrate you two different examples. The first one is about your homework. As you all remember, I hope, you had a homework last week. And there are two challenges in this homework. I asked you to create a map with two different types of doors. The first one is a normal door, a regular door, and the other one is a sliding door, and the second one has to use the Matinee tool. So let's switch to Unreal Engine 4 and practice. So the first thing is, let's create a new map. And I want to apply a material to the floor. Let me check. Yes. Let's use a concrete. Do we have any concretes? Yes, we have this kind of stuff. And here we go. So I want to duplicate this mesh to create a walking area. And also I'm selecting both mesh with Control and left mouse button, and also pressing Alt and dragging it. I'm duplicating it with this way too. And also I'm reduplicating with this side. So we have a good play area. There's a gap here, so let's fix it. I'm selecting this mesh and pressing Ctrl, reselecting this one, so we can move the objects. Yes, perfect. As you can see, it's perfectly fit now. So we need two rooms, two basic rooms. To create that, I'm gonna use starter content, architecture, and we have doors just like that. Let's put this one, and I'm gonna rotate this. Yes. So, and we need also walls. So this is for 100 times 400, so I will use this wall to fit it. Yes, it fits perfectly, this side. And also I'm reduplicating it with Alt key. Yes, and create the back wall. Let's go to up view. Yes, this fits perfectly. So also we need a roof, and I'm rotating the mesh in 90 degrees. So yes, it doesn't fit perfectly, but it's okay. The roof is not our concern. So I'm going back to materials and contents, and let's apply another material. Let's search for another concrete. How's that? So not bad. Applying this material to all the faces. So we need a door, of course, and I'm unchecking the material and going back to starter content and architecture. So I'm just gonna pick one of these walls. Let's check, is it okay? So no, I don't like that. I'm gonna use this one. This is perfect because we need a rotating door, so its pivot point is here, so we can rotate the door from this orient. So first thing is we need to rescale it to fit this area. First of all, I'm rotating it this way, and let's change its scale. So I'm pressing space key, and yes, as you can recall, you can see, I can change the Z scale from here, and also I can change the value from here. So I guess I need to slightly, no, let's try. Yes, this can be okay. It's okay. So I'm also making the same thing with axis. Let's 3. Yes, is it too much? No, we can use that. So it's very kind of thick for a door, so I'm gonna change its scale in this direction too. Oh, let's try to, yes. So it's, yeah, it looks fine. So we need a trigger box. So I'm going to all classes and searching for trigger. So we are gonna use a trigger volume. Also there's a box trigger, we can use it as well. So let's go with box trigger for this time. I'm placing it and also scaling it because it's a volume, as you know. and we have to go in this volume. So the last thing I need to do is selecting this door object and change it to a movable object, because we are going to open the door with affecting the trigger. So I'm selecting the trigger and going back to level blueprint and placing it and changing its scales, and I'm pressing in an empty area and create a collision event, and I'm gonna add on actor collision begin overlap, because what I want is when the player triggers enters this volume, our node has to trigger, and we had an action from here. So we need to select the door and we need to rotate it. So I'm gonna create a reference from this door and set actor rotation. So this little node is changing and resetting the actor's rotation. So as in this point we need the this actor's default rotation, and just change to 90. In this condition the actor is set to 0, 0 and 90, so we need to set this Z info to 90. And so opening the door, I'm going back and rotating 90 degrees. So in this variation, in this case, it's going to 0 degrees. So we need to update this info to 0, to default value. It means when we trigger this event, as soon as I connect this little triangle to this one, when we trigger this event, it goes to this action, this position, actually the rotation. So it flips to open position. In the next lessons we are gonna use curves and animation like views, but this is enough for this class. So just I'm gonna compile and save this one. I'm gonna rename it as homework. So let's give it a try. I'm playing press. Sorry, I forgot to rotate it. Yes. As soon as I enter the trigger volume, it's opening, but it's opening it suddenly. What we need is opening the door slowly and in just like an animation, but we're gonna make that in next weeks. So the next thing I'm gonna do is going back to this trigger, and I'm reselecting this object and going back to collision, and I'm gonna pick on actor and overlap. So this means when my overlapping with this volume finish, it triggers from this event. So I want to duplicate it. I just Control C, Control V, and linking this set actor rotation with the reference, connecting and setting this to 90 degrees. This means as soon as I left the volume, the door will go back to the original position, just like that. So the next thing is a sliding door. So I'm selecting these objects with control key and mouse button, and even the trigger box, and pressing Alt key and Shift key. I'm creating a duplication, and we just shift in the screen. So for this is a good example for sliding door. So what I'm gonna do is scaling down in this action, in this view. So like 0.12, 0.12. Sorry. 0. Oh, sorry. This little lock is locked, as you can see. So this means if I shrink this value, it applies all other values. So I'm going back to 0.25 and unlocking it, and now I can scale it in this direction. So I'm duplicating the mesh, and I'm gonna rotate it and repositioning it. So there's a small gap over here. Let's try 15. They are overlapping, I guess. Just a little. Yes, it looks okay because it's a door. So we're gonna use a matinee tool, as you recall. I'm gonna add a matinee tool and selecting the first door and create a new group. Door, sorry, 1. I'm creating a movement track, and I'm repositioning it to the, sorry, first the thing I have to do is going in timeline and changing the position, and going back to timeline and press enter for creating a key over here. So I'm gonna make the same thing with the door 2. Creating a movement track. Going back in 5 seconds in timeline. Opening the door like that. Pressing enter key. You can enter key in this screen too, but make sure to this one is selected. So if I press loop, I can see the animation from here, and I'm saving and exiting the matinee tool. So where is our matinee tool in the scene? It's here. It goes under the object. So I'm selecting this trigger volume, and again I'm creating a collision trigger, and I'm selecting the matinee actor and creating a reference and create a play node and connecting the trigger, as you can see. So let's give it a try. As you can see, as soon as I enter the volume, the matinee plays the scene and the doors open slowly. So that's it for your homework. And next thing is we will try a blueprint actor. We are gonna create a blueprint class. So let's roll. So in this example, I want to create a platform over here, and let's use the platform and rescale it. As soon as the our player goes on this object, so let's change the our player's spawn point. As soon as the player goes the top of the top of this platform, I want to spawn something like a landmine over here, somewhere here, and if we hit it with our gun in the default this one, our default gun, I want to explode it, so let's give it a try. Let's start with blueprint actor. I'm in an empty folder in content, and I'm pressing right key in an empty slot and blueprint class, and I'm gonna choose actor blueprint class, and let's name it BP underscore landmine. So I'm double clicking it to open it. As you can see, it's over here. Let's save it. I'm double clicking it and opening it, and open full blueprint editor. Yes, save. As you can see, it's in default view. There are semi-opaque event begin play, event actor begin overlap, and event tick. So we don't need these. I'm selecting and deleting it. So I'm gonna use a shape from add components, like a sphere, yes, and I'm gonna use a sphere collision. So as you can see, it goes under this tree view, so it means we can see it in viewport. It means this object is attached to this one. This is a collision sphere, but it's, as you can see, it's very small, smaller than the other objects. So I want to scale it, because we are gonna check our collision from the sphere collision object. As you can see, if we don't expand this one and the first one contains it, we cannot detect the collision, because the first one holds the collision before we touch this. So I'm going back to events graph, and under it's selected, under this events there's a on component. I'm pressing it, it creates a node. This means if this actor, this sphere collision gets a hit, it triggers from here. So to detect that, I'm gonna print a log, hello. Yes, I connected, and compiling and saving it. So, and also I want to add a physics on the sphere, not the collision. I'm gonna check the simulate physics and compile and save. So let's give it a try. I'm adding the actor from here. Yes, let's give it a try. As you can see, it creates a hello message in the screen. So let's focus on spawning it as soon as we step on this area. So what we need is a trigger. I'm gonna add a box trigger over here and scale it just like contains the platform, and rescaling in this action. And I'm going back to level blueprint because this thing is happening in levels. And yes, don't forget the trigger volume is selected. Pressing an empty area, collision, add actor overlap. So I want to spawn this object as soon as I enter this area. So to accomplish that, we need a target because we need spawn points in our 3D space. I'm changing its location and going back to level blueprint and select create a reference to this target point, and I'm gonna get its location and other transformation data. Get actor, sorry, location. Yes, this little note is gives us the rotation, sorry, the location vector of this object, and I can break it like dragging it and break vector. So as you can see, it gives us float x, y, and z data, but we are gonna talk about variables and functions later, so I'm gonna delete this one. So the next thing is what we need is spawning an actor node. Spawn actor from class. As you can see, there's a node here. I'm selecting it. So this node spawns an actor to the level, but it needs a reference. So I'm gonna select this one in our content browser and going back to level blueprint and pressing this little arrow, and as you can see, it creates a reference. So when I trigger this action and connecting it to this one, it spawns one of our actors to the scene from this point, but it's not connected yet. So to spawning an actor, we need a transform knowledge, but we have only actor location. So we can do two things. We can get actor transform data as well, but also we can create transformation from here, make transform with. So basically it creates it combines three vectors: the location vector, the rotation vector, and the scale data. We don't need these two because it's a spherical object, as you can recall, this one, and the rotation is meaningless at this point. So I'm connecting this value to our spawn transform point and compiling and saving. So let's give it a try. As soon as I enter this area, it spawns an actor just we created, and as soon as I hit it with my gun, it prints a hello to the screen. If I leave this area and re-enter it, it creates another object, as you can see. So I'm gonna exit this one. So I want an exploding object, a mine. So let's try that. So I was using a log printout to testing it. I'm gonna delete that. What I want an explosion. So next week we will talk about particles, but for today we can just use one. I'm going starter content, and where is it? particles. Yes, there's an explosion particle here. I'm selecting it and I'm dragging it to my landmine blueprints and dropping it over here. So as I just said, we are gonna talk about particles next week, but I'm gonna just making auto active false and dragging a reference here and set active here, new active. I'm selecting this one and connecting this node here. This means in this time it's not gonna write hello to the screen, it activates this explosion node. So let's give a try. It creates it. Yes, as you can see, it creates the explosion effect, but it's not here, it's over here. That's because we created the object in this point, and our sphere collision is under this one. This is attached to this object, but our explosion node is not attached. So as soon as we created the blueprint over here, our ball dropping down to the ground, this sphere, collision sphere, follows it, but our explosion node, our particle node is not following it. So I'm gonna dragging it here. So in this case, we attach our particle to the object as well. Let's give a try. Yes, this is perfect, but the object it's still there, and the explosion is not good. It's not showing good. So I'm gonna select the sphere and set visibility false and connecting this wall and activating this. So in this case, when the player hits the object with the gun, it sets the visibility of this sphere false, and after that it it activates the particle. So let's check it. Yes, it looks perfect, but as you can see, we are not destroying the object, we are just invisible it, hiding it, so it's still there, and other objects can collide with it. So we have to delete the object after the explosion. Let's give a delay for 0.5 seconds, maybe 6 seconds, and let's use self actor and destroy actor. So we are triggering it with hitting with our gun, setting the visibility of our sphere, outer sphere, false, activating the particle, waiting 0.6 seconds, and destroying the actor. I hit it, I hope we destroyed it. So as you can see, the second one doesn't interact with the first one because we delete the actor from the scene. So in the right panel, you can see what's going on in World Outliner. As soon as we create the sphere, it creates, let's try Shift F1, I guess. Yes, it's here. as you can see, we created a blueprint landmine 2 actor and we deleted. So we are done for today. I'm waiting you on our online meeting. You can ask your questions if you have any, and goodbye.